Welcome back to Greater Bridgewater. I'm your host, Myles Heher, and in this episode we are continuing our candidate conversations, joined by a very interesting and also we've had a very informative episode. We're joined by 9th Congressional District Congressman Stephen Lynch. And Mr. Lynch, we had a very interesting first half of the show, and just briefly following up on the health care bill that we were discussing, what are some of the effects that could be seen from this health care bill?
Well, that's a great question, Myles. I think so far what the Congressional Budget Office is saying is that, number one, costs continue to climb at the same rate as they were prior to the reform. And that's a problem because there was a lot of talk about bending the cost curve and saving money. But so far, at least according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, they're saying prices of health care are still going straight up. So that's terrible, and I think that makes this whole system unsustainable, number one. Number two, I think that as costs continue to rise, I think it may actually cut off access by some individuals who might be shut off because of the prohibitive price. I think you'll see some businesses that might have problems with meeting premiums. At least the initial outlook for the first quarter of this year indicates that commercial premiums, people trying to buy a commercial insurance policy, prices have gone up about 14%. So if that continues, you'll see more people forced out of the market. You'll see more employers who are squeezed out of a position of providing health care for their employees. So I don't think that's good. Also, not financial, but healthcare institutions. You'll see hospitals with greater and greater pressure on them. And also, you'll see, I think what Congress is contemplating is trying to cut down on what we spend right now on Medicare. And they are projecting that they're going to try to cut $390 billion out of Medicare. And I don't see how they could possibly do that without affecting the quality of care provided under that program.
Very, very heavy stuff of sorts. So
yeah, I think so.
A lot of work to come, especially with health care. But let's talk about the current administration. How do you feel the Obama administration has done since taking office last January?
Well, you have to remember that at the point that the president was raising his hand and taking the oath on January 20th, 2009, we were losing about 800,000 jobs a month. So the president walked into a pretty tough situation. And then the next month, I think we lost 760,000 jobs. So he walked in at the worst possible time. And so I think a lot of blame has been laid at his doorstep that was not necessarily of his doing. He walked into a tough situation. Now, still, I think there is justifiable frustration that we spent so much time focusing on health care and other issues when I think if we had shifted our focus and focused entirely on creating jobs and getting the economy going again, we might have been better served. That's in retrospect. So, but I think the president, he has lived up to his promise in Iraq. The president laid out a plan in Iraq, and I've been there 12 times now. And, I have to say that he has lived up to every single promise he has made with respect to Iraq. He said he would draw down the number of troops from 165,000 to 50,000. He has done that. There are still problems in Iraq, but I think they are problems that are really in the hands of the Iraqi government. They have not been able to form a coalition government since the last election. So, but the president has done a good job on that. I think he's had a tough time in Afghanistan. Since taking office, he actually authorized a surge of 30,000 troops. And he's got a timeline of July of 2011 where he says he will begin to draw down troops. So I think the jury is still out on how that might turn out, but certainly I think it had the elements of soundness that the president's plan was certainly a sound plan given the circumstances at the time.
Now, let's speak a little bit about Congress, which has a lot to do with where Obama's votes go and also kind of show where they go. As a member of Congress, I mean, you have a lot to do and a lot of work up there. But how do you feel the current Congress is doing? And if you had to grade them, what would the grade be?
Well, if I had to give them a grade, I would give them an incomplete. We haven't done any of the appropriations bills. There are 12 major appropriations bills that we're responsible for doing each session. We have done none of that. The House has passed a couple, but the Senate has not returned those, and so a lot of the business is left undone. We have not addressed the Bush tax cut issue, and we're going to have to do that because if we don't take action, then they expire in January, and so millions and millions of Americans, tens of millions, will be hit with this extra tax if Congress fails to act. So I am hoping that when we go back in on November 15th that we'll get right to the business of doing that. It'll be interesting to see what we take up because that will depend on the elections. Obviously, if there's a big changeover, and there are a lot of people predicting that, I think that there'll be reluctance to do things in a lame duck session when a lot of members are not going to be held accountable. If they've been voted out of office, it's sort of a limbo period, and I'm not so sure how much we'll be able to get done under those circumstances.
How do you feel the election results could play into what gets done? Do you think there will be an overturn?
Well, I think definitely the wins. Look, I'm not an election expert. I leave that to folks like you, Myles. But it does seem that there's a tailwind for the Republicans in this midterm election, and most people. There are a couple of fellows down in Washington, Cook and Charlie Cook, and there's another fellow, I'm forgetting his name. And I've watched them over the years, and they have a pretty good sense of this thing. They have a good track record, and Stu Rothenberg is the other fellow's name. Now, what they're saying is that the Republicans will pick up enough seats to change the House. That's what they're saying. So I put they've got a credible record in the past of being able to predict these things. So I sort of listen to them, and I think they're probably right. But if that makes the numbers much closer, I don't know how much the Republicans will win by, but I think it'll end up with a pretty much deadlocked Congress. And so in that environment, I'm not sure what the heck we could get done, especially, if things get tighter in the Senate and they've got difficult rules over there to work with. So it'll be interesting. I'll say that.
Absolutely.
It'll be interesting.
Now, let's talk about your current race. You do have a Republican opponent, but what differs you from him?
Well, I really don't know my opponent that well. We haven't debated yet. We've got one scheduled for Fox 25. I really, look, I'm not one of those fellows that goes around saying bad things about folks that are running against them. That's not my style at all. All I can say is I know how hard I work, and I know how much time I spend here at home. I'm home every single week. I love my job. I have tried to bring my perspective. Look, before coming to Congress, I was just an iron worker, and I understand how it is, going out there on a job site and trying to raise a family. I know what it's like when you're in a tough economy, and I know what it's like to stand in an unemployment line. So I try to take those experiences of what I think is probably normal here in my district and bring it down to D.C., where those experiences are not normal. When you talk about the experiences of the other members of Congress, there are very few who have actually strapped on work boots and gone out and done a day's work. So you have to sort of explain to them, I think, in some cases, what it means, what these bills mean to the lives of the people that I represent. And I work really hard at that. I try to stay completely engaged. As I said before, I've been over to Iraq 12 times. I'm on an oversight committee to make sure that our sons and daughters in uniform have the equipment and the tools and the resources that they need to come home safely and successfully. I've been over to Afghanistan 5 times, I think now, doing the same thing, working with the folks over there, trying to make sure that our troops, our sons and daughters, are adequately equipped and protected. And I've tried to show that as someone who represents families who have sons and daughters in uniform, I'm there for them. I am there on the ground with them, so that I don't have to read a paper to figure out what's going on in Iraq or Afghanistan. I can base my decisions on my own experience. So I've tried to be as engaged and as forceful and as fair. I'm not somebody who goes. I'm probably best described as a moderate Democrat or a conservative Democrat, some think. I don't go around kicking people in the shins just to make myself feel good or look good. I try to work with people across the aisle and try to get the best thing. Look, I don't always do the liberal thing. I don't always do the conservative thing. I try to find out what's the right thing. What's the right thing? And that has made some groups on the far right and the far left a little bit angry at me. But I think that's what most of the people want in my district, not just Bridgewater and East Bridgewater and West Bridgewater, but I think the entire district. I think that's what people want. They want a little bit of common sense for a change.
Now, just a few moments left in our taping here today. How would you appeal to voters across the aisle?
Well, I think I've had the opportunity to co-sponsor bills with Republican members. Mike Castle from Delaware, he lost to a Tea Party person in the primary, but he was a really thoughtful guy. A fellow named Todd Platts, who's from Gettysburg area of Pennsylvania. He and I have worked together on a bunch of issues. He and Bob Inglis from South Carolina have been to Iraq with me probably 10 times out of the 12 times I've been over there. We went out on the surge together in Iraq when that was ongoing. So trying to work with, it's all about relationships and respecting those members of Congress, whether they're Republicans or a Democrat. They represent about 650,000 people,
right,
just like I do.
Now,
and I try to respect them the same way I would like to be respected.
Great. Hate to cut you off. We are out of time, but quickly, can you give your website so people can read more about you?
Sure. StephenLynch04Congress.com is our website, and
great.
I'd love to have your business.
Great. Stephen Lynch, thank you for joining us on another episode of Greater Bridgewater and Candidate Conversations. Thank you for watching.